At Clarence House, sometime after 14 April 1978, a dining table is being prepared for the Queen Mother. The junior members of the below-stairs staff have arranged the cutlery in straight lines. Each place setting matches the next. The cruets, small containers for salt, pepper, vinegar, or mustard, are positioned according to the household's standards. Then, William Tallon walks through. He isn't carrying a tray. He isn't correcting the table. He simply takes dirty cruets and places them among the clean ones. The younger staff notice. A supervisor notices. Someone complains. The complaint reaches Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Her reported response is only 5 words. She used to just smile. The account comes from a former member of the household, but even his name is uncertain. One transcript calls him Colin Brooks. Related reporting identifies him as Liam Cullen, Liam Cullen Brooks, or Cullen Brooks. He shouldn't be confused with Major Colin Burgess, a separate former equerry. The name is disputed. The sequence is consistent across the available accounts. Careful table setting, dirty cruets, a complaint, and the Queen Mother's smile. That small gesture is the central piece of evidence. It does not prove that every servant hated Talon, that every complaint failed, or that the Queen Mother ordered anyone to tolerate him. It does show how a trusted servant could sit inside the complaint system and still appear protected from its consequences. William Tallon's formal title was Steward and Page of the Backstairs. The Queen Mother's amusement made that title more powerful than it looked. Talon had entered royal service in 1951, aged about 15, as a junior assistant at the Easter Court at Windsor. A boy from Birtley in County Durham, raised partly in Coventry after his family moved there, he wanted the royal world before he had ever entered it. By the time he reached Clarence House, service was no longer an ambition. It was the structure of his adult life. He served the royal family for 51 years. After King George VI died in February 1952, Elizabeth became Queen Mother, and Talon eventually joined her household. Clarence House became his workplace, residence, social world, and source of status. On 14 April 1978, a Clarence House memorandum recorded the appointment that made him famous. The document stated that Her Majesty the Queen Mother had approved Mr. Talon as Steward and Page of the Backstairs, with R. Wilcock appointed Deputy Steward and Page of the Presence. The memorandum spells the name Talon. The established spelling is Talon, used in biographies, obituaries, royal household references, and the title of Tom Quinn's biography, Backstairs Billy. The error matters because the office does not. Steward and Page of the Backstairs was a senior position among the household's domestic staff. Backstairs referred to the service side of the residence, the areas, routines, and workers that kept the public rooms operating while remaining largely invisible to visitors. Talon succeeded Walter Taylor. From 1978, he became the leading figure among the backstairs staff at Clarence House. Some later descriptions call him top dog or say that he ruled the backstairs. Those phrases are journalistic shorthand, not formal ranks. His documented title was Steward and Page of the Backstairs, not head of household. That distinction is important. Talon was senior, but the evidence does not establish that he formally commanded every employee in every department. His authority was strongest among the backstairs and male domestic staff. A book description identifies Ty Monroe as an under-butler responsible to Talon, which places at least one table service role below him. The hierarchy wasn't complicated in principle. At the top stood the Queen Mother, the employer and household authority. Above-stairs officers included private secretaries, ladies-in-waiting, equerries, and other officials whose work involved administration, ceremony, communications, and public representation. Below stairs were the domestic workers, stewards, butlers, under-butlers, footmen, pages, valets, maids, cooks, gardeners, and other staff whose work made the residence function. A junior aide could set the table. An under-butler or supervisor could inspect it. Talon could move through the space, alter it, and continue on his way. That was the imbalance the cruets exposed. Table setting was visible work. The cutlery had to line up, the settings had to match, the silver had to be clean, the cruets had to be placed correctly. A senior servant could treat that precision as a joke, because the junior staff had no equivalent power to turn the joke back on him. The story does not provide a complete Clarence House staffing chart. It does not identify the supervisor, name the younger workers, or preserve a written complaint. It gives us something narrower and more useful, a glimpse of who could create a problem, who could report it, and who had access to the person capable of deciding what happened next. Talon's access was unusually direct. The Telegraph's accounts of his career describe him as being on duty from early morning until the Queen Mother went to bed. He could enter her private rooms without knocking. He bought Christmas presents for her to give to other people. He helped manage receptions, drinks, social arrangements, and the practical details of her day. The Sydney Morning Herald described him as someone who would put guests at ease, place carefully chosen objects opposite them at lunch, and alert the Queen Mother once the room was ready. His job was service, but it also involved interpretation. Talon knew who the guests were, why they had come, what might amuse the Queen Mother, and when she should enter the room. He wasn't merely one servant among many waiting for instructions from a distant supervisor. He was an intermediary between the household and the person at its center. That made the cruet incident possible. The account says Talon could move through the dining room after the junior staff had completed their work. It also says the complaint could reach the Queen Mother because the people reporting him understood that he had direct access to her private apartments. The same access that made him useful also made him difficult to challenge. A complaint against a junior footman could travel up through the butler or steward. A complaint against the steward had to travel through the same structure Talon helped control. The route existed, but the person at its center occupied a different category from the people making the complaint. That is why the smile matters. The reported response isn't a formal order. No source records the Queen Mother saying Talon couldn't be disciplined. No surviving document shows a written warning, demotion, investigation, or change in his duties. The account only says that the complaint reached her and that she smiled. The safest conclusion is also the most revealing. In that reported incident, the complaint reached the highest relevant authority and produced no visible consequence. For the junior workers, the lesson wouldn't have required a speech. Talon remained in position. His access remained intact. The table would still have to be set correctly the next day. The dirty cruets could be removed, the settings restored, and the work repeated. The smile converted personal amusement into a workplace signal. It suggested that Talon's relationship with the Queen Mother could outweigh the ordinary route by which staff were expected to resolve misconduct or disruption. That is an interpretation, not a statement of her private motive. The sources don't allow anyone to diagnose what the Queen Mother felt, understood, or intended in that moment. The point is the practical meaning of what happened after the complaint. Power often appears in the response to a grievance. If a complaint produces a warning, the hierarchy has one set of rules. If it produces nothing, the hierarchy has another. Talon's position had been built over decades. He was born William John Stevenson Tallon on 12 November 1935. He entered royal service at 15 and stayed within it until the Queen Mother died in 2002. He never worked in an ordinary civilian occupation after leaving school. His entire career developed inside the royal household. That longevity created knowledge no new employee could easily match. Talon knew the residences, the schedules, the rituals, the personal preferences, the family history, and the private jokes. He had worked for the institution long enough to understand not only the written routines, but also the unwritten ones. The Queen Mother's relationship with him was described by multiple secondary sources as unusually close. He was called her trusted servant, confidant, right-hand man, and personal favorite. Those descriptions aren't themselves proof that she protected him from every consequence. but they established the relationship surrounding the cruet complaint. The arrangement was mutually useful. Talon made the Queen Mother laugh. He brought theatricality into a life governed by ceremony. He could keep guests supplied with drinks, arrange the atmosphere of a lunch, and make the private household feel less formal than the public one. The Queen Mother, in turn, gave Talon access to a world that had once seemed impossibly distant. His work placed him beside her at public appearances, at Clarence House, at Royal Lodge, at Balmoral, and at social events where a footman would normally remain part of the background. Photographs show him beside her on birthdays and public occasions. Reports describe him walking her corgis, organizing receptions, and helping her through the routines of old age. In 1975, he received the Royal Victorian Medal in silver. His status was therefore a mixture of formal office, practical authority, personal trust, and long familiarity. No single piece of evidence explains it completely. Together, they show why Talon could be both a servant and a fixture of the household's inner life. That dual status disrupted the ordinary chain of command. To junior staff, he was senior enough to influence their work. To the Queen Mother, he was close enough to enter her private rooms without knocking. To the wider household, he was still technically a servant, but one with access that many servants didn't possess. The Queen Mother's private preference could therefore alter the practical weight of a complaint, even without a formal order. A junior worker didn't need to be told that Talon was protected if the result of a complaint made the point. The person complained about remained secure. The person complaining returned to the same hierarchy. The boundary between a joke and an abuse of rank was left for the lower status workers to absorb. The available evidence does not establish that this happened every time. It does not show that all staff were afraid of Talon. It does not support the claim that he was universally hated. The record is mixed. Some people described him as charming, funny, loyal, and indispensable. Others described him as exacting or difficult, and later accounts made allegations about his treatment of junior staff. The testimony around the cruets belongs within that mixed record, not above it. The incident is also not a contemporaneous palace document. It comes through a modern documentary-style account and derivative reporting. The original interview and recording metadata aren't independently traceable in the supplied material. The witness's identity varies between sources. The episode has no precise date, no written household log, and no surviving complaint form. That weakness does not make the story useless. It limits what the story can prove. It supports a reported practice involving dirty cruets, a reported complaint, and a reported smile. It supports the interpretation that Talon's closeness to the Queen Mother shaped how the complaint was received. It does not measure the whole Clarence House workforce. Anecdotes are valuable because they preserve small actions. They are dangerous when treated as statistics. The cruets tell us what one former staff member remembered about one pattern of behavior. They don't tell us how many workers complained, how often Talon interfered with tables, whether other incidents led to discipline, or whether every member of staff interpreted the Queen Mother's smile in the same way. The evidence does not even establish that the smile produced no private conversation afterward. It only records no visible punishment or change in position, yet institutions are often understood through visible consequences rather than private intentions. The staff could see who was still there. They could see who still entered the private apartments. They could see who remained close to the Queen Mother at lunch, at receptions, and during daily routines. That visibility gave the relationship force. A protection system does not require a written exemption. It can operate through repeated access, informal trust, and the knowledge that senior authority is unlikely to act against a favored insider. The Queen Mother's household had formal offices above and below stairs, but the day-to-day system depended heavily on personal relationships. A steward, butler, or supervisor could direct work. The Queen Mother could override the atmosphere of that structure simply by treating a complaint as amusing. The complaint route therefore existed in theory, but remained limited in practice. There is no detailed public grievance procedure for the Queen Mother's household covering the dirty cruet period. The sources don't establish a modern human resources department or a formal hearing system. The broader royal household had senior officials responsible for staffing and administration, and historical reporting describes palace employees using union structures to raise their gripes. Those channels matter because they show that staff weren't literally without options. A complaint could be raised with a supervisor, carried to a senior household officer, or discussed through employee representation. But the cruet story does not say that the workers filed a formal grievance through a union. It describes an informal complaint reaching the Queen Mother directly. That route may have been the most natural one, because Talon's relationship with her was the source of the problem. It was also the route most likely to expose the weakness of the hierarchy. The complaint bypassed ordinary lower-level resolution and arrived at the person whose trust gave Talon his unusual protection. The result wasn't a documented sanction, it was a smile. That is why the incident is about more than bad table manners. Dirty cruets are trivial objects. Their institutional meaning isn't trivial. They show a senior insider using access to disrupt work performed by junior employees, then surviving the complaint because his relationship with the employer carried more weight than the worker's demand for correction. The household's polished public image depended on invisible labor. The clean table mattered because servants were paid to make disorder disappear before guests saw it. Talon's act made the labor visible by turning its precision into a target. He could introduce disorder and leave the junior staff to restore order. The lower status workers carried the practical cost. They had to notice the breach, decide whether to report it, risk being seen as humorless or troublesome, and then continue working after the complaint had changed nothing. That final part is easy to miss. A failed complaint does not merely leave the original behavior untouched. It changes the risk calculation for every later complaint. The next worker must decide whether the same problem is worth raising. The next supervisor must decide whether intervention is worth challenging someone with better access. Over time, the hierarchy teaches people what not to expect. This is where employment-linked accommodation becomes relevant, but only as context. The dirty cruet testimony concerns Talon's period as steward and page of the backstairs from 1978 onward. The parliamentary accommodation evidence comes from later official records, principally the late 1990s and 2001, alongside policy material dating from 1st of April 1994. Those records don't identify Talon, the junior workers in the cruet story, or anyone's individual lease. They don't show that a particular complainant lived at Clarence House or stayed in the job because leaving would mean losing a room. They establish a broader employment structure. House of Commons public accounts evidence stated, "For employees who pay no rent, the provision of residential accommodation was taken into account in setting their salaries." The same evidence said that this principle applied to accommodation provided to civil list employees as part of their remuneration package and to facilitate the performance of their duties. In other words, housing could be part of the employment package. Some royal household properties were tied to the job or the post. When employment ended, the accommodation generally had to be vacated. The arrangement had an obvious practical effect. A worker who left could lose wages and housing at the same time. The policy didn't apply identically to everyone. Some employees paid rent. Some received accommodation with a salary adjustment. Some lived in properties allocated because their duties required proximity to the residents. Others had private housing. The official evidence does not support the claim that every servant was trapped, but it does establish unequal exit costs. From 1st of April 1994, certain staff in tied accommodation faced a uniform abatement of 16.7% of gross salary. The reduction reflected the value of the accommodation within their remuneration. The system treated housing as part of pay because, for some employees, it was part of what the job provided. The occupied Royal Palace's estate contained 285 self-contained flats and houses in the 1997-98 parliamentary evidence. Housing could therefore make the employment relationship more secure while the job lasted and more precarious when it ended. A junior servant who disliked the hierarchy might not face a simple choice between staying and finding another job. Leaving could mean finding new work, finding new housing, paying market rent, and absorbing the cost of moving at the same time. That mechanism helps explain why a protected insider could continue to shape the workplace, even when lower-status staff were unhappy. It does not prove that the workers in the cruet anecdote were housed by the royal household. It establishes why departure, in a household with tied accommodation, wasn't equally easy for everyone. The evidence must remain separate from the incident. The smile is a reported response in a retrospective account. The housing material is official policy evidence from a later period. One is a witness's memory of a dining room episode. The other describes remuneration and accommodation across parts of the royal household and civil list system. Together, they support a structural argument. Separately, they have different limits. The accommodation evidence also complicates Talon's own story. Talon lived at Gate Lodge, a small residence associated with Clarence House and overlooking the mall. For decades, it gave him a home within the environment where he worked. After the Queen Mother died on 30 March 2002 at Royal Lodge, Windsor, aged 101, Talon's position ended, and he was ordered to leave. Reports said he would move to a housing association flat in Kennington, costing £80 a week. The precise terms and timing vary between accounts, but the loss of Gate Lodge is well documented. Some later stories say Talon believed the Queen Mother had promised him the cottage for life. No official record supplied here confirms a binding lifetime promise. The employment-linked housing policy points in the other direction. Accommodation was generally connected to the post and had to be vacated when the employment ended. Talon's experience shows the limit of personal protection. His access and favor lasted as long as the Queen Mother's household lasted. When she died, the institution no longer had the same personal reason to preserve his position. The Guardian reported in April 2002 that the Queen Mother's approximately 50 staff faced the consequences of her death. A palace spokesman said that when a member of the royal family died, their staff, in effect, become redundant. Whether a particular worker received a pension or payment depended on the job and contract. The same article describes staff facing the loss of their homes. It reported that of the 285 houses and apartments belonging to the royal estate, most were occupied on a grace and favor basis. The arrangement was generous when the royal countenance supported it, and insecure when the employment ended. Those figures place the cost of leaving in practical terms. A change of job could also mean a change of address, a new rent, and the loss of a residence close to the workplace. Talon, despite being the Queen Mother's favorite, wasn't protected from that final institutional decision. He moved to a ground-floor flat in Kennington. His royal career ended with the death of the person who had made it possible. That aftermath does not erase the earlier power imbalance. It clarifies its source. Talon's protection was personal and situational, not an absolute legal shield. It could make him difficult for subordinates to challenge while the Queen Mother was alive, yet fail completely once her household dissolved. The same system that elevated him could leave lower-status staff exposed too. In 2002, the Queen Mother's gardeners, maids, footmen, housekeepers, butlers, and other employees faced redundancy. Some had accommodation, some didn't. Their contracts differed. Their financial positions differed. The record does not allow their individual outcomes to be reconstructed. The practical point is narrower. People who depended on employment-linked housing had more to lose by leaving than workers with independent accommodation. That is enough to change how a workplace functions. A bad hierarchy does not need to be physically locked. It can be maintained by access, income, housing, reputation, and the uncertainty of what comes after resignation. Talon's role combined nearly all of those pressures. He had seniority, decades of institutional knowledge, access to the Queen Mother, and a public identity that had grown around his closeness to her. He was known as Backstairs Billy because his office put him at the top of the household service structure, but the nickname also made him a character whose presence extended beyond his job description. He was recognizable at the gates of Clarence House. He appeared beside the Queen Mother at birthday gatherings. He was photographed in tailcoat and medals. Visitors could mistake him for a minor royal because he carried himself with such assurance. That theatrical confidence could be charming to guests and threatening to junior workers. A servant who seemed to possess the employer's ear didn't need to issue a formal threat to affect the behavior of people below him. He could whisper a joke about a colleague. He could enter the room without knocking. He could interfere with the table. He could rely on the fact that his relationship with the Queen Mother was visible. The dirty cruets were one version of that power. Later accounts describe other instances in which Talon was indulged by the Queen Mother, including a separate 1991 episode involving a young man brought back to Clarence House. The reported wording of her response varies, so it shouldn't be presented as a verbatim quotation. The relevance is limited. It's another secondary account describing her refusal to treat Talon's conduct as a reason to dismiss him. It isn't evidence that the cruet incident happened exactly as described. It isn't proof of a general policy. It's context for the reported pattern of tolerance. The stronger evidence remains the formal appointment, the documented access, the close relationship, and the testimony about the complaint. Talon's name also needs care. Talon appears in the 1978 memorandum and in some transcript material. Talon is the established spelling. Head of household appears in the dirty cruet account as a description of his practical status below stairs, but it wasn't his formal title. These corrections don't weaken the story. They make its mechanism clearer. He didn't need to be formally called head of household to have influence. Steward and page of the back stairs was already a senior office. He didn't need a written exemption from discipline if his access to the Queen Mother made ordinary discipline unlikely. He didn't need every worker to fear him for his position to alter the choices available to the workers beneath him. The story is therefore about a gap between formal structure and practical power. Formally, complaints could move through supervisors and senior household officers. Practically, the person at the center of the complaint was also the Queen Mother's trusted intermediary. Formally, staff could leave their employment. Practically, some staff housing was tied to the job, and a worker who resigned could lose both income and a home. Formally, Talon was a servant. Practically, his access allowed him to operate closer to the employer than many people above his pay grade. That gap is where favoritism becomes institutional. The word protected should be understood as an inference from consequences, not as a direct declaration by the Queen Mother. No source gives us a memo saying Talon was immune from discipline. No document records her ordering staff to accept his behavior. The evidence shows something quieter. A complaint arrived, the Queen Mother smiled, and Talon's position didn't visibly change. That can be enough to communicate protection. One of the most revealing features of the story is the absence of a dramatic confrontation. No one is thrown out. No one makes a speech. No formal rule is announced. A junior worker notices the dirty cruets. A complaint travels upward, and the household returns to work. The system continues because the system has taught everyone what the complaint is worth. The Queen Mother's smile may have been amusement. It may have been indulgence. It may have been an informal refusal to become involved in a minor dispute. The historical record can't settle her private intention. Its workplace consequence is easier to see. The complaint had reached the person who could alter Talon's position. It didn't. William Tallon remained in the Queen Mother's service until her death in 2002. He died in London on 23 November 2007, aged 72. His long career ended not with a public explanation of the complaints against him, but with the disappearance of the household that had given him authority. The available record can't tell us how every former employee remembered him. It can't quantify staff morale or establish how often junior workers chose silence. It can't prove that everyone below stairs understood the Queen Mother's smile in the same way. It can show why one anecdote carried such force. The table had been set according to exact standards. A senior servant disrupted it. Lower status staff noticed and complained. The complaint reached the household employer. The response was amusement, and the visible hierarchy stayed intact. The dirty cruets weren't a measurement of the entire Queen Mother's household. They were a small, physical example of how one protected relationship could distort the meaning of a complaint. The formal title was Steward and Page of the Backstairs. The practical message was simpler. Talon could cross the boundary between service and intimacy. He could affect the work of people beneath him and still remain close to the Queen Mother. A junior servant might have a route to complain, but the route ended at the person whose favor helped shield him. Later parliamentary records show why endurance and exit weren't equal choices for all royal household employees. When accommodation formed part of remuneration, leaving could mean losing the job and the home attached to it. That evidence does not identify the cruet complainants, but it explains the material pressure surrounding a workplace where personal protection carried so much weight. One anecdote can't prove a total verdict on Talon or the Queen Mother's staff. It can reveal a power relationship. The Queen Mother's smile mattered, because everyone below stairs could read its consequence. The complaint had reached the highest relevant authority, and nothing visible happened afterward. Power is often communicated through an order. In a household like Clarence House, it could also be communicated through the visible failure of a complaint to produce one.